In the past 2 videos, I was focusing on meringue, whether it was over or under whipped, and now I want to look at what happens when you have the perfect meringue, you have the perfect ingredients, you have the perfect kitchen, but you divide up your batter into 3 bowls to color them differently. For a character macaron, or in my case, a swirl macaron, and you're not really sure, or you accidentally macaronage to different degrees in each of your different colors. This can be really challenging, especially as you are newer to macarons and maybe you got the hang of it and one color and doing everything for, that one batch is okay, but as soon as you have a couple different batches, it's really easy for things to get wonky. So here you can see I'm starting off with a really nice stiff peak. I have the same gel food coloring brand that I'm using for the different colors and the different ways I'll macaronage, and I'm starting off by just adding in my dry ingredients to the meringue in about 3 additions. You can see here, and you'll be able to see later, that sometimes when things go wrong, it definitely is a human error in the case of macaronage. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell, were my ingredients bad? Was it too humid in my kitchen? Was my KitchenAid bowl or was my spatula a little greasy? There are so many variables that could go wrong, but what I really want to show you with this swirl and by splitting up the batter is that with the exact same conditions and ingredients, and even if your meringue is perfect, things can still go wrong. And it can be especially disappointing if you are creating something like a swirl and 1 or 2 of the colors you are using just go perfectly and would have led to the perfect macarons, but even if 1 or if 2 of the colors are not turning out the way you want, it can actually ruin the whole batch. So it can be a ton of pressure to get that macaronage exactly the same on all of your bowls. So I want to walk through kind of what happens if you do make that mistake, and why your swirl macarons might not be turning out how you had hoped or how you've seen them turn out online for other people. Now that I've just barely gotten all of my ingredients incorporated, I am going to add colorant. I am using AmeriColor's gel food coloring. It is one of my preferred brands, and I really like the gel food coloring when I am splitting up and dividing my batches. Like this, I find it mixes in so easily and a lot more consistently than a powdered food coloring does. So with this first bowl, I'm going to try to incorporate my colorant and do the macaronage normally. So I'm looking for that ribbon stage. I want to deflate some of the air bubbles, but I still want to have some texture. I don't want this to be looking watery or too liquidy. So this is looking close, but not quite there yet. I'm going to give it a few more turns around my bowl, fold the batter over onto itself, use my spatula to scrape the batter against the sides of my bowl, and here we go. Now this is looking a little bit more like a ribbon flowing off my spatula. So this is kind of the standard. The blue is what we want our macaron batter to look like. Now with this green bowl, I'm going to mix in my colorant, but I'm going to stop pretty soon after that. I'm not going to quite go as far to get quite as nice of a ribbon. When I first pulled my spatula up out of the blue bowl before, when I was checking in, I'm going to stop at about that point with the green and just do a tiny bit of an undermixing. I still want these macarons to turn out, so I was a little bit afraid to not mix any farther, but I'm going to stop pretty soon here just to demonstrate what could happen if you undermix a little bit versus overmix a little bit. All right, now I'm adding yellow into this last bowl, and this one I am going to on purpose over macaronage. So I'm going to get the yellow incorporated here, and I'm going to be doing that same scraping and folding motion with my batter. When I check in, you'll see the stages I got to with the green bowl that was a bit undermixed, but not too bad, and the blue bowl that was really the perfect macaronage. And then I'm going to keep going, and it's going to be a challenge to watch. It was a challenge to do because I knew I was ruining my batter. Definitely, if you are going to over or under mix, I absolutely recommend under mixing or under macaronaging. It can lead to some difficulties. Your macaron shells might not smooth out as much as they should. They might bake up a little bit taller or higher. The interior might be a little bit too cake-like because the air isn't deflated so much, so the structures might be really intense and dense. It might lead to taller macarons, so there are definitely some issues that come with under macaronaging. Okay, so if I were going to make a proper macaron, I would want to be stopping this yellow bowl now. I would not want to continue at all. I've already reached the ribbon stage. But as I continue mixing and macaronaging this bowl, I am deflating the meringue and deflating to the point that things are just going to be getting liquidy. When I lift up my spatula, it might look kind of like a ribbon, but it's going to go too quickly, and you will see in my bowl the batter will really quickly fall back onto itself and completely smooth out. Instead of having any ridges or anything, any texture at all, it will just look like a bowl of batter, more like a runny cake batter or something. And when you over macaronage, you are often going to create this really ripply effect on the top of the macaron shells. They usually look underbaked, even if you bake them longer than normal. Usually the foot will be quite large, the macaron batter, because it has no structure, because you've deflated all the meringue, is going to spread out quite quickly. So you might end up with pancake looking thin macaron shells. So there are a ton of problems that can result from over macaronaging your batter. Once I get this to the point that I know it is good and thoroughly over mixed, I'm transferring this to my piping bag. I'm going to put all three in separate piping bags. Usually for a swirl, I like to mix them all up on plastic wrap. I have some videos where I show that. I really love that swirl method, but here I want to keep them a little bit more distinct so you can see what happens to each of the batters separately as we go into this swirl and baking process. As I am piping, I have the yellow over macaronage, the blue normal macaronage, and the green slightly under macaronaged batters all here together. I have my silpat that I'm piping onto. I have that template underneath, and so far everything is looking pretty normal. So again, this is one of the tricky parts I think about macarons, and especially being new to macarons, is that, okay, I started with a perfect meringue. I started with perfect ingredients. I started on the perfect weather day. As I'm piping, things are looking normal. They're looking good even. And that's why it can be so frustrating and disappointing to realize later that something went wrong, because the process can be looking good so much of the time. As I'm piping, it's still a little bit hard to tell, but you can start to see that the green is not moving. The blue is moving a little bit. The yellow is starting to move a lot. What happens when you have a swirl with different levels of macaronage, whether it's this extreme or within the bounds of normal, is that you're going to end up with ovals. Even if you pipe everything, piping bag, piping tip, straight up and down, you're doing everything right, you could still end up with ovals if one or two of the colors in your swirl are overmixed even a little bit, or mixed more than one of the other colors. I'm going to tap this tray just to release any large air pockets or bubbles, and I'll show you what they're looking like. You can see here that the yellow is definitely spreading out here a bit more. You could see it a bit more in person than on my camera, but there's definitely like a height difference on the shells, but they still look pretty normal going into the oven. Coming out of the oven, completely different story. You can just tell by that wrinkly top and the kind of sticky bottom is trying to stick to my silpat that the yellow has just completely ruined this entire batch. Again, if we pick up one of those macaron shells from the very beginning where it was really just the green and blue batter in my piping tip, those macarons are honestly totally fine. And even on the swirl, we can see that with the same ingredients, the same batter, the same everything, the blue part, perfect. The green part, actually also just fine. The yellow part, completely destroyed. It's wrinkly, the foot is large, it's oval in shape, it was sticky on the bottom for the same bake time, the same oven, the same everything. So I really wanted to show you this swirl macaron as I start to go into what happens if you over or under mix your macaron batter. I think some people feel like if they make a batch of macarons and something goes wrong, that they don't have the right oven, or they don't have the right ingredients, or something like the meringue wasn't right, or they used the wrong food coloring. Which, it's totally possible that any of those things are true, but it could be something as simple like you mixed your batter 30 seconds longer than you should have. So if you are seeing wrinkly shells, if your shells are sticking to your silpats, if you are seeing a large foot, that little kind of roughly part that's the ring around the macaron shell, if you are seeing any of those clues, you might be looking at a macaron that has been macaronaged too long, too far. As you can see from the demonstration of the slightly undermixed macaron batter and then the normally mixed macaron batter with the same ingredients, it is definitely better to undermix than it is to overmix. So if this is something that you are trying to figure out, definitely err on the side of undermixing. All right, I am going to continue more of these adventures of exploring macaron fails, especially in the realm of overmixing and undermixing batter, as well as many other variables. So definitely subscribe if you haven't already. And if there are any things you would love for me to look into or explore, leave me a note down below. Would love your input. Okay, until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye.